The Greeks feared death more than they feared their own gods. And the god who ruled that eternal darkness? He wasn't some horned demon or cackling villain. He was Hades, the eldest son of the Titans, the brother who got stuck with the worst job in the cosmos. This is his complete story. Most people think Hades was evil because he ruled the underworld. That's like calling a prison warden evil for running the prison. Hades didn't create death, he didn't cause suffering, he just managed it. His job was to make sure the dead stayed dead, that the natural order held, and that nobody escaped their eternal fate. Not exactly a career path that wins you popularity contests. Here's where his story really begins. Before Hades ruled anything, he was swallowed whole by his father, Cronus, along with 4 of his other siblings. Cronus had heard a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him. So naturally, he did what any rational Titan would do. He ate them. One by one, as they were born, Cronus devoured his own children whole. Hades was the 4th to go down. Imagine being a newborn god, taking your first breath, and immediately ending up in your father's stomach. That was Hades' welcome to existence. He wasn't alone in this prison that was his father's stomach. His siblings, Hestia, Demeter, and Hera, had already been consumed by Cronus, and, soon after, Poseidon joined them. They grew up inside their father's belly, conscious and aware, but completely trapped. Years passed like this. Then came Zeus, the youngest, who their mother Rhea managed to save by tricking Cronus with a stone wrapped in blankets. When Zeus finally freed his siblings by forcing Cronus to vomit them up, Hades emerged fully grown, but fundamentally changed. You don't spend your entire childhood in darkness without it leaving a mark. The 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, led a massive war against the Titans called the Titanomachy. 10 years of divine combat that shook the foundations of reality itself. Mountains crumbled. Seas boiled. The sky itself cracked open. And when the dust finally settled and the Titans lay defeated, the 3 brothers had to divide creation among themselves. Most believe they drew lots. That's how the universe was distributed. Not through combat or negotiation, but through cosmic chance. Zeus drew the sky and became king of the gods. Poseidon claimed the seas. Hades, he pulled the short straw and got the underworld. The realm of the dead. The one place no god wanted to rule. Most versions of this story paint Hades as bitter about this arrangement. But the ancient texts suggest something different. Hades accepted his role without complaint. Maybe he understood that someone had to do it. Maybe after being trapped in darkness for so long, he felt oddly suited for the job. Or maybe he just wanted to be left alone, and ruling the dead guaranteed fewer visitors than ruling the sky. He descended into his new kingdom and got to work. The underworld wasn't just a single gloomy cave. Hades organized it into distinct regions, each serving a specific purpose. He established the rivers that separated the living from the dead, the Styx, the Acheron, the Phlegethon, rivers of hate, woe, and fire. He appointed Charon as the ferryman, the one who would transport souls across the Styx for a single coin payment. That's why Greeks placed coins on the eyes of their dead. No payment meant waiting on the shores forever. Then came Cerberus, the 3-headed hound. Most people know Cerberus as the monster guarding the gates of the underworld, but they misunderstand his purpose. He wasn't there to keep people out. He was there to keep them in. The dead have a tendency to wander, to try and return to the world above. Cerberus made sure that didn't happen. 3 heads, each watching a different direction, each capable of tearing apart any soul that attempted escape. Hades also created the 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who would determine where each soul spent eternity. The exceptionally virtuous went to Elysium, a paradise of eternal peace. The ordinary went to the Asphodel Meadows, a gray neutral existence. The wicked descended into Tartarus, where suffering had no end and time had no meaning. Unlike his brothers, Hades rarely left his realm. Zeus constantly meddled in mortal affairs, throwing thunderbolts and seducing anything that moved. Poseidon drowned sailors on whims and flooded coastlines out of spite. But Hades stayed in the underworld, managing the dead with cold efficiency. He didn't interfere with the living. He didn't play favorites. When your time came, you went to his realm, and he treated everyone exactly the same, king or beggar, hero or coward. This fairness made him respected, but not loved. Greeks rarely built temples to Hades. They avoided speaking his name directly, using epithets like Platon instead, which means the wealthy one, referring to the precious metals and gems found beneath the earth. Fear and respect, yes. Worship, that was reserved for gods who might actually help you while you were alive. But Hades was lonely, surrounded by the dead, managing an endless stream of souls, never leaving his dark kingdom. He watched his brothers enjoy the company of other gods, of nymphs and mortals. He witnessed life and love from a distance, always separate, always apart. That loneliness would eventually drive him to make a decision that would define his entire mythology, a decision involving a young goddess, a mother's fury, and the changing of the seasons themselves. What he did next didn't just affect the underworld, it transformed the entire world above. One day, while wandering the upper world during one of his rare visits, Hades saw Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and Zeus, young, vibrant, embodying everything the underworld was not. She laughed. She danced among flowers. She represented life itself. And Hades, ruler of death, wanted her. Not in the casual way Zeus pursued his conquests. Hades felt something deeper, something that comes from endless isolation. He saw in her a possibility of companionship, someone to share his eternal existence. But he knew the truth. No one would willingly choose to live in the land of the dead. No one would abandon sunlight for shadow, flowers for stone, life for an eternity among corpses. So Hades did what desperate gods do. He took her. While Persephone gathered full oars in a meadow, the earth split open. Hades emerged in his chariot, grabbed her, and descended back into his realm before anyone could react. The abduction lasted seconds. One moment she existed in the world of light. The next, she found herself queen of the dead. Demeter's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. She searched everywhere, calling her daughter's name, tearing across the earth in a frenzy that lasted 9 days. When she finally learned the truth, that Hades had taken Persephone with Zeus's silent approval, her grief transformed into rage. Demeter abandoned her duties entirely. She was the goddess of the harvest, the one who made crops grow, who ensured humanity could eat. Without her, nothing grew. Fields turned brown, trees shed their leaves. Animals starved. Humans began dying in massive numbers. The first famine struck the world. Zeus realized he had a problem. If humans all died, who would worship the gods? Who would make sacrifices and offerings? The Olympians depended on human devotion for their power and relevance. A world without humans was a world without purpose for the gods. He sent messenger after messenger to Demeter, begging her to restore the harvest. She refused every time. "Bring back my daughter," she demanded. Only then would she allow anything to grow again. Zeus had no choice. He commanded Hades to return Persephone to the surface. For once, the king of the underworld had to obey his younger brother. But Hades was clever. Before releasing Persephone, he offered her pomegranate seeds. Just a few, he said. A small snack before her journey home. She ate them. 6 seeds. That simple act changed everything. There was an ancient law, older than the Olympians themselves. Anyone who consumed food or drink in the underworld became bound to it. They couldn't fully leave. Those 6 pomegranate seeds meant Persephone could return to the surface, but she would have to come back. The final agreement split her time. 6 months with her mother in the world above. 6 months with Hades below. When Persephone returned to the surface each year, Demeter's joy made everything bloom. Spring arrived, then summer. Flowers erupted from the ground. Trees bore fruit. The world became warm and alive. But when Persephone descended back to the underworld, Demeter's sorrow killed the land again. Autumn stripped the trees bare. Winter froze the earth. This cycle repeated forever, creating the seasons themselves. Hades had his companion. Demeter had her daughter part-time, and the world gained its rhythm of death and rebirth. Over time, something unexpected happened. Persephone adapted. The frightened girl who had been dragged into darkness became the queen of the underworld in her own right. She learned to wield power over the dead. She became just as formidable as Hades, sometimes even more ruthless. When the musician Orpheus descended into the underworld to retrieve his dead wife, it was Persephone who ultimately decided to let him try. When other heroes made the journey below, she deterred. Mind their fates alongside her husband. She transformed from victim to sovereign. Some versions of the myth suggest she eventually fell in love with Hades. Others maintain she remained a prisoner who simply learned to survive. The truth probably lies somewhere between. She gained power and purpose in her role, even if she never chose it initially. Their marriage became one of the stranger relationships in mythology. Not passionate like Aphrodite and Ares, not volatile like Zeus and Hera, but something colder and more practical. A kingdom shared by two rulers who understood each other's isolation. Hades never took other lovers. Unlike every other male Olympian, he remained faithful to Persephone. Perhaps he knew how fragile their arrangement was. Perhaps he genuinely loved her in his own distant way. Or perhaps he simply couldn't imagine anyone else willingly staying in his realm. The underworld continued operating with its same cold efficiency. Souls arrived, were judged, and sent to their eternal destinations. Hades maintained order without favoritism or mercy. But now he had someone beside him, someone who understood what it meant to rule over endings rather than beginnings. The pomegranate became her symbol, those 6 seeds that bound her to darkness. Every autumn, when leaves began to fall, the Greeks knew Persephone was descending again. Every spring, when the first flowers pushed through frozen ground, they knew she had returned. The cycle never stopped. It never changed. And Hades, the god everyone feared but no one worshipped, had finally found something that made his eternal Tantiforum ask bearable, but his story doesn't end there. His realm would be tested by heroes, invaded by the ambitious, and challenged by those who refused to accept death's finality. The first real challenge came from a mortal who refused to die. Sisyphus, the king of Corinth, was clever enough to cheat death itself. When Thanatos, the personification of death, came for him, Sisyphus tricked him into demonstrating how the chains worked, then locked Thanatos in them instead. With death itself imprisoned, nobody could die. Warriors fought in battles and kept standing despite fatal wounds. The old lingered when their time had passed. The natural order collapsed. Ares, the god of war, was furious. What glory existed in battles where nobody died? He stormed into Corinth, freed Thanatos, and dragged Sisyphus to the underworld personally. But Sisyphus had planned ahead. Before leaving, he told his wife not to perform funeral rites. When he arrived before Hades, he complained that his wife had disrespected him by not providing proper burial. He begged for permission to return to the surface just long enough to scold her and arrange his funeral. Hades, who valued proper burial customs, agreed. Sisyphus returned to life and promptly refused to go back. He lived for years, bragging about outsmarting the god of death. Eventually, age caught him. When he finally did die, Hades designed a special punishment. Sisyphus would push a boulder up a hill for eternity. Just before reaching the top, it would roll back down, forever. The punishment fit perfectly because Sisyphus had tried to escape the one inevitable thing. So now, he would experience futility without end. Then came Orpheus, the musician whose songs could charm stones. When his wife, Eurydice, died from a snake bite, he did something almost nobody attempted. He walked into the underworld, while still alive, descended past Cerberus, and approached the throne. His music was so beautiful that the rivers of the underworld stopped flowing to listen. The tortured souls in Tartarus paused their suffering. Even the Furies, those ancient goddesses of vengeance, wept. Hades and Persephone sat on their thrones, unmoved at first. They had heard every plea imaginable. But Orpheus didn't beg. He sang about love, loss, and the cruelty of death that comes too soon. His voice carried the weight of genuine grief without demanding anything. Persephone felt it first. She remembered being torn from her mother, dragged into darkness against her will. She touched Hades' arm and whispered to him. For the first time in recorded myth, Hades agreed to release a soul. But there were conditions. Eurydice would follow Orpheus back to the surface, but he couldn't look at her until they both reached sunlight. If he turned around even once, she would return to the underworld forever. They began the ascent. Orpheus walked ahead, hearing nothing behind him. No footsteps, no breathing. The underworld was silent by nature, so he had no proof she was actually following. Doubt crept in. What if Hades had lied? What if this was punishment for his arrogance? What if he climbed all the way back only to find himself alone? Steps from the exit, with sunlight visible ahead, he turned. Eurydice stood there, still in shadow. Their eyes met for an instant. Then she dissolved like smoke, pulled back into darkness. She was gone. Hades hadn't lied or tricked him. The rule was simple, and Orpheus broke it. Some say doubt made him turn. Others claim it was impatience or fear. The reason didn't matter. The underworld had its soul back, and the living learned again that death's grip doesn't loosen. The most audacious invasion came from Herakles during his 12th labor. Eurystheus, the king who assigned the tasks, demanded something impossible. Bring back Cerberus, the three-headed guardian of the underworld, without using weapons. Herakles descended through a cave entrance and crossed the Styx. When he reached the throne, he didn't sneak or scheme. He simply asked permission. Hades was intrigued. Here stood Zeus's son, the strongest mortal alive, asking politely instead of attacking. The god of the underworld made an offer. If Herakles could overpower Cerberus using only his bare hands, he could borrow the hound. But he had to return it unharmed. Herakles found Cerberus at the gates and wrestled all three heads into submission. The massive dog fought with everything it had, but raw strength won. Herakles carried Cerberus to the surface, showed it to Eurystheus, who predictably panicked and hid, then returned the hound to its post. Hades gained respect for the mortal who honored their agreement. Cerberus went back to guarding the gates, and the underworld remained secure. These challenges never truly threatened Hades' control. They were interruptions, moments where the living tried to bargain with inevitability. Some succeeded temporarily, most failed. All of them eventually returned as permanent residents. Hades never celebrated these victories. He didn't gloat when souls arrived or mock those who had tried to escape. He simply waited, because waiting was what he did best. Every hero who descended into his realm eventually left or stayed forever. Every deal made had terms that favored the house. Every escape attempt ended the same way. The underworld remained constant while the surface world changed. Empires rose and fell. Heroes lived and died. Gods had affairs and feuds and momentary passions. But below it all, Hades maintained the same cold order he had established from the beginning. He was the god nobody wanted to meet, but everyone eventually would. That's what made Hades different from every other god. Zeus chased glory, Poseidon demanded worship, Athena sought wisdom, Ares craved war. But Hades? He just did his job. No temples begged for his favor because everyone knew they'd meet him eventually anyway. No prayers could change what he represented. He was the one certainty in a world of chaos, the final destination that waited patiently for gods and mortals alike. His story isn't about conquest or transformation, it's about acceptance. He accepted the worst role in creation and made it function. He accepted loneliness until he found companionship. He accepted that everyone feared him and never tried to change their minds. In the end, Hades remained exactly what he had always been, inevitable.